There was once a river, so old that the mountains themselves bowed their snowy heads in respect each morning when its silver waters stirred with the first touch of dawn, a river that remembered every name ever whispered to it, from the tiniest pebble in its bed to the great kings and wanderers who once knelt at its shore, their fingers dipped in its current as they murmured secrets no one else would hear. The river had no map, no beginning that could be traced, no end that could be claimed, and yet it flowed patiently through valleys and forests and sleeping towns where ivy curled up ancient walls and lamplight flickered like the eyes of dreaming owls, and in that slow, steady current were echoes of voices long forgotten by the world above, though never by the river. There was the name of Amara, a girl who once lived in a village of fishermen where nets were woven with laughter and salt, and who sang to the river every evening as if it were her oldest friend, and the river, in return, carried her songs to the sea and back again, so that even 1,000 years later, her melody could still be heard in the hush of reeds swaying at dusk. Then there was Tarin, the boy who carved boats from cedar and drifted downstream with his dreams of distant lands. His name carried gently through the centuries like a leaf never quite sinking, whispered still by stones who remembered the rhythm of his laughter. And Mikkel, a tired scholar, who walked alone with books under his arm and questions in his heart, who once knelt to ask the river what it knew of memory, and the river, in its own way, showed him by letting him see the shimmer of reflections that weren't there a moment before. A woman brushing her hair by a ruined bridge, a dog running through a meadow that had not existed in centuries, a child's hand reaching into the current to touch the stars. The river's water was not just water, but something older, a thread between time and thought, a mirror that remembered more than it showed. And for those who listened, truly listened, they would hear not only names but the feelings tied to them, joy woven into the syllables of a forgotten love, sorrow folded into the hush of someone never returned, hope rising like mist at dawn when a name was whispered in yearning. And so people came, quietly and without fanfare, over the years, some to remember and some to forget, each leaving something behind, a letter dropped into the current, a necklace laid upon the stones, a tear that mingled with the flow. And the river, kind and eternal, remembered them all, never judging, never rushing, simply carrying each name downstream as though it were precious silk. And it was said that when the wind is soft and the moon sits low, if you sit by its shore and close your eyes, you might hear a name you've never known, but feel you've always remembered, like a dream from another life, and it will bring you peace you didn't know you were missing. Old villagers spoke of how the river shimmered more brightly in autumn, as if memory glowed with gold then, and children born nearby often dreamed of people they had never met and stories they had never heard, because the river was always whispering to them, even in sleep. Some believed the river had once been a thread of the stars that fell to earth long ago, too soft to crash and too wise to forget, and when it wound its way through the roots of ancient trees and the bones of forgotten cities, it gathered not only names but meanings, and so it became a keeper of everything the world left behind, not out of sadness, but love. And so the river still flows, under bridges carved with mossy runes, past meadows where fireflies drift like forgotten wishes, through hills where nothing stirs but the sigh of the wind, always remembering, always listening, carrying names like lullabies down to the sea that forgets so the river may remember, a quiet current in a loud world, forever watching, forever gentle, forever home to every name ever softly spoken in the language of dreams. And so the river kept flowing, quiet and eternal, winding through the arms of an earth that trusted it to carry the things no one else could. Names, memories, feelings too soft to speak aloud, and dreams that had never fully faded. The seasons passed like sighs, and still the river hummed its ageless lullaby, brushing past the roots of trees older than cities and gliding beneath bridges long since forgotten by the maps of men, yet still beloved by the birds that nested in their cracks and the foxes that paused to drink at dusk. Every curve of the river held stories, like folds in a sleeping robe, and in one such bend, hidden beneath a veil of willow trees whose green fingers touched the water like a mother soothing a child, there lived an old man named Elian who had listened to the river every morning for 40 years, not to speak to it, but simply to hear what it remembered today. His cottage was built of stone and song, with ivy wrapped around the chimney and a crooked fence, the wine liked to open just wide enough for rabbits to sneak through, and Elian would sit on a wooden stool at the edge of the water, his boots half submerged, his eyes half closed, letting the names come to him like waves. He never wrote them down, never spoke them aloud, just smiled and nodded and let them pass through him as if he were a hollow reed the river played like a flute. He had once been a sailor, this quiet man, one who had chased the horizon and returned with stories stitched into the lines of his face, but the only tale he ever told was that of the name the river had once given back to him, a name he had long buried in grief, whispered on a night when the moon was a silver comma in a velvet sky and the river shimmered like glass spun from stardust, a name that belonged to someone he had loved and lost, someone whose laughter he had almost forgotten, until the river, ever gentle, ever watching, reminded him not in words, but in the warm hush of its current curling around his ankles like an embrace. And elsewhere along that same river, farther upstream where moss grew thick and lanterns hung from branches that bent low with time, there lived a woman named Naira, who wove dream cloth on a loom made of driftwood and stars, and though she spoke little and lived alone, people would sometimes bring her tokens, a seashell, a thimble, a lock of hair, asking her to weave a name into her cloth, and she would nod without question and sit beside the river as it murmured to her in ripples and reflections, and she would thread its memory into golden silk, creating shawls and blankets that, when wrapped around shoulders or laid across chests, brought the comfort of being remembered even in silence. Travelers said that if you wore one of Naira's cloths on a cold night, you would dream of someone who had loved you deeply, even if you had never met them before, and you would wake with tears not of sadness, but of knowing that somewhere, some thread in the river's long memory had touched you. Further still, near where the river split briefly into twin streams, one clear and soft, the other dark and deep, lived children who played with paper boats made of wishes, writing names on their tiny sails and releasing them into the current, giggling as they watched them drift away. And though the boats often sank or snagged on reeds, the river remembered every name and every laugh and every splash of bare feet against its surface, keeping them safe beneath its ripples like marbles. Tucked into a velvet pouch, the river never forgot, and never hurried, and even when storms came, and they did, sometimes, with wild winds and trembling trees, the river held firm, cradling its memories beneath the froth, protecting each name like a lullaby whispered through thunder. And when the sun returned and the banks dried and peace resumed its slow waltz, the river would once again glimmer under the stars, calling softly to those who listened, to the old man and his forgotten love, to the weaver of dream cloth, to the children of paper wishes, to the night birds and the foxes and the ivy-wrapped bridges, carrying their stories in its current as if the whole world were simply a dream being remembered gently, name, by a river that had never stopped listening. And still the river moved, unhurried and knowing, as though time itself had surrendered to its rhythm, winding deeper into the land like a lullaby seeking its final note. And in its quiet embrace lay not just names, but everything that names could not hold, the feeling of a mother's arms from long ago, the echo of a farewell never spoken, the warmth of a smile seen only once yet carried forever in the heart. And in these unspoken memories the river found its purpose, not merely to remember, but to remind the world that nothing loved was ever truly lost. As the river reached the last curve before it joined the endless sea, there stood a tree unlike any other, old beyond years, its bark etched with thousands of initials and quiet carvings made by hands now dust. And it was said this tree had grown from a single seed dropped by a traveler who had once whispered his own name into the river and asked it to carry it safely. And so it did, and when the river passed that place each day, It brushed gently against the roots of the tree like a greeting, like the meeting of old friends who needed no words. Beneath its shade sat a girl named Lyra, eyes closed, palms open, not searching for names, but simply listening the way the moon listens to the tide. And in her dreams the river sang to her, not in voices or phrases, but in sensations. Soft wind over wheat fields, the scent of lavender on an old scarf, the hush of snow falling on an empty street, the sound of footsteps pausing just behind her before turning away. She had never asked the river for anything, not even her own name, and yet it gave her everything, piece by piece, until one day she stood and turned and began walking along the river bank, not to leave, but to follow, her steps slow, her eyes kind, and wherever she walked, birds followed and reeds swayed and the river shimmered brighter, as if it knew this was the moment it had been waiting for, someone not seeking to be remembered, but to carry remembrance forward. And so Lyra became part of the river's story, not as a whisper, but as a guide, her presence like the glow of dawn before the sun arrives. And those who came to the river afterward often said they felt watched over, not by eyes, but by something, warm and gentle and unseen, as if the river now had a heartbeat that beat just slightly slower than their own, steady and patient and endlessly kind. And as centuries passed and maps changed and cities rose and crumbled and rose again, the river flowed on, weaving through time like a silver thread through soft cloth, remembering not just names but moments, the quiet bravery of someone choosing forgiveness, the secret joy of a child finding their first star, the silent tears of a person releasing grief beneath the moonlight. And in all of this, the river remained a keeper of the forgotten, a singer of soft truths, a listener to the soul's quietest echoes. And it is said that even now, if you walk alone at dusk and find yourself beside a stream you've never seen before, and the water seems to pause just slightly at your feet, you should sit and breathe and close your eyes, for the river may be waiting to return a name to you, not always your own, but one your heart has missed. And when you hear it, not with your ears, but deep in the still place within, you'll know that the river has remembered you too, has carried you all along, and always will, long after stories fade and stars dim and the world turns quiet once more, for there will always be a river somewhere, winding under dreaming skies, whispering gently through time, remembering the names that sleep cannot erase,